Welcome to the Next Step In podcast, where we talk about education, workforce, and building Indiana's future. In today's episode, we're diving deeper into an important topic college. Whether you're already planning to go or still wondering if it's the right path for you, today's episode will help clarify things. Our guest today is Dr. Eric Schansberg, professor of economics at Indiana University Southeast in New Albany. Dr. Schansberg is an author of several books, including College 101, What Students and Parents Should Know About Universities. He's written dozens of academic journal articles and hundreds of articles on public policy. He earned his PhD from Texas A&M University and has taught at Texas A&M, King's College in New York City, and at IU Southeast. In his book, College 101, Dr. Schansberg focuses on two groups of people, those who are getting ready to go to college and those who aren't sure if they should. He breaks it all down through six big questions, which we will cover in today's episode. So, whether you're a student, a parent, or educator, this conversation is packed with practical advice to help make smarter, more confident choices about higher education. So, let's jump right in. Here's our conversation with Dr. Eric Schansberg. Welcome back to the Next Step In podcast. We have a treat for you today. We have Dr. Eric Schansberg joining us for this episode 6 of the podcast, which I don't know where 6 episodes went already, but we're here, Eddie.
Yeah, we made it. That's crazy to believe. Already 6 episodes in.
Well, we're very lucky to have Dr. Schansberg. Thank you so much for being here. And we're going to talk about one of our favorite topics, college. Obviously, I know that's a topic that is pretty important to you too, so much so that you wrote a book on it, College 101. And so would love to hear more about the book and about what it's about and maybe what got you to want to write this book.
I think a lot of us, when people find out what we do, they have about the thing on their elbow, whatever it is. And as a teacher, as a professor, people are asking questions about college and they have maybe just general questions, or they're really interested because their kids are approaching college or in college. And so it's of particular interest to them. And so, I end up saying a lot of the same things over and over again. And sometimes people aren't really that surprised by what I say. Sometimes they are. So there's some value added there, apparently. But then the second thing is that, and again, I think other professions have this, people don't even know the right questions to ask many times, right? The known unknowns. I know that I don't know something. Then there's the unknown unknowns. I'm not even aware that I'm missing something. And when I would say certain things, they're like, I had no idea that was a thing. And I'm so glad you mentioned that to me. So enough of those kind of conversations. I thought, it'd be pretty easy to crank out a little ebook on this. And I think it could be a really valuable resource for students and parents as they're making these really important decisions.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that we've seen that, I've enjoyed reading it just to see a different perspective too. And I think I can only imagine how many people have come to you and asked these questions over the years. So when you were writing this book, kind of talk to us a little bit about who you really had in mind, because I know that you kind of address it in a couple different ways, from the student's perspective, from the parents, both. How did you kind of adapt it for each audience?
The language, to be candid, I aimed it at students, but I think the reality is that a lot of times it's going to be parents that do the reading. So I really have both audiences in mind. I'm certainly hopeful that students are interested enough and will, spend a little bit of time reading a short little book that can be helpful. But I also recognize parents are going to be a major part of the audience. So the language is adopted towards students, but really I'm looking at both. Are you suggesting that sometimes the high school students that are interested in college are not reading text in preparation for their collegiate decisions? Yeah, it could be. I don't have as much experience with high school students, not nearly as much as I do at college, but yes, I can only imagine that might be a thing. Absolutely. Eric, again, thanks again for joining us on this episode. As a college professor and an economist, how have you seen higher education landscape evolve over the past decade? What's your opinion on that? Well, I think the thing that's getting the most attention these days is the price or cost of college. And one of the unfortunate things there is that the easiest data to get are what's called sticker price. And that's the price you go when you look at the website. But there's a thing called FAFSA, many of your people know about. And that's basically government mandated. Hey, tell us all about your finances. Tell us about your income and your wealth. And what do colleges do with that? They love that because it's free information about how loaded Joe is and how much Eddie's on the struggle bus, right? So then I get to Joe's kids and I know to charge them a higher rate and I got to take it easy on Eddie's kids. So there's scholarships and there's all kinds of things, but FAFSA allows colleges to do what economists call price discrimination. And so then there's an incentive to let the sticker price rise. What the prices people are really paying are quite a bit different than that. I remember hearing a talk by the president of Hanover College back in the day, and they said that their students pay the same tuition on average as people who go to IU, which I don't know if that's true or not, but I mean, it's possible, right? Because of the point that I'm making, although the Hanover sticker price is far higher, the actual price people are paying is quite a bit lower than that sticker price. So the data that you hear many times are talking about sticker price, but not really getting at the cost of tuition. You look at the harder data to get, college tuition, really what's actually being paid, it really hasn't changed that much for 15 or 20 years, but it's getting a lot of discussion, certainly, and it's on the table to talk about. Second thing would be dual credit. So at least in Indiana, it's a big feature, and a lot of kids bringing in more and more credit. And the high schools, you hope have qualified teachers in there with good standards, but I don't know. You just don't quite know what you're getting there. And so we don't control that. Maybe it's great. Maybe it's mediocre, whatever, but it certainly influences what happens at college that students are bringing in, 10, 30, 50 credits and really has changed the landscape a lot. And the last thing would be online. So just online education. What's that doing in terms of competition? The students often just want to get their gen ed courses out of the way. And so they're using online as a way to get to that. And then related to that discussion would be, what are we going to do with AI and AI intersecting with online education? I think it's a terrific challenge for higher ed. And if we're not careful in policing that, our courses become a joke. And so we have to be very careful with AI, not just teaching students how to use AI, but not to let them game the system using AI if online courses are going to be, a prominent piece of what we deliver.
So interesting that we've talked a little bit about that throughout throughout some of our podcasts about mainly about early college and about what does that look like when you're bringing in dual credit. So what would you say, and how would you address the individual that I would say is very pro early college and saying, hey, look, it cuts the time down for degree completion, it saves families money because they maybe aren't spending as much out of pocket. So how would you address them when you really talk about early college and some of those factors that seem to be pretty publicly touted throughout media and mainstream media these days?
And I'm a fan of dual credit. I'm a fan of, what we do in high schools with respect to these two tiers. I think, as far as I know, all high schools have a couple of tiers. One's on the side of college prep, and you're going to take your honors and AP and dual credit sorts of courses. And then the second tier, and not so much. So, if you're a kid that's going to college and, dual credit, honors, AP, I'd say take all of those you can. I think as you look forward to college, it's an opportunity, right? You're going to bring in a set of courses. And in most cases, you probably got what you needed. There may be some cases where you look back and go, yeah, I'm not sure I really got what I needed in Mr. Johnson's course. And maybe I got to take a refresher there. So just take an honest, candid look at what you really learned in those classes, especially if it's going to be in your field of study. No big deal if you're in gen ed. At the end of the day, it'd be nice if you had a glorious history course. But if you're not going to be, if you're going to be a doctor, it's not the end of the world if your history course in high school is not that great. But, if you're going to be an historian or if you're going to be an accountant or whatever these fields are, biology or chemistry, right? And you took these courses in high school, what'd you really get? And it'd be a shame if you got off to a rough start because you want to be a nursing major or a doctor when you need those really high grades at college and you didn't get quite the prep that you thought that you were going to get.
Going back to the book, thank you for going through that. Going back to the book, you opened it by saying, what can you get out of college? It's kind of a great question, really, as you start the book. So, how should students today define the value of a college education? Because I think that even that definition sometimes seems like it's a little bit challenged in the mainstream media these days.
audience a little bit, right? That I should have given you a breakdown on students. Some students are ready to go and they're gonna go. And so the book has certain angles for them. There's other people who have questions about whether they should go or not. And so I'm very interested in talking to them as well. Joe, we at a liberal admissions university like our own, we get a lot of people that roll in here and don't have the combination of aptitude and work ethic that's going to let them be successful. And that's not good for anybody. All right. They don't really want to be here. It's the middle class reflex. My parents want me to go, blah, blah, blah. And they really just shouldn't be here. College is not the right move for them. It's not that they're not sharp enough. It's not that they couldn't do it. It's just they're not in the mood to do it right now, right? They don't have the background in terms of study skills. They're just kind of tired of school. They really need to work a mediocre job for a while and figure out, yeah, I don't want to do that the rest of my life. And then they're ready for college. But we just send people to college, right? It's this great middle class reflex. And I just think parents and students both do too much of that. So college is wonderful if you're ready to engage it. If you're not, don't do it because the costs are too high. Go work for a while, get a trade, right? College isn't for everybody, but even for those who eventually will be successful in college, they're not going to be successful right out of high school. So let's just be smart about that. And I think for the future, though, you're ultimately deciding, a lot about what your future is going to look like. What kind of life are you going to have? What kind of money are you going to have? What kind of jobs are you going to have? And life is too short and life is too long to work a, terrible job with that you don't enjoy. I mean, I love my work, and that's a terrific blessing. And a lot of people don't have that. And college doesn't have to be, but college can be a way to achieve those kind of dreams and just to get people thinking along those lines.
That's good stuff. Now, one of the things that we've discussed on this podcast is the challenge of identifying the transformational versus transactional side of the collegiate experience, right? What do you think is one of the biggest misconceptions that families have about what colleges deliver when it comes to the outputs and outcomes?
It depends on the kind of college you go to, which we're going to get to later. But I don't think people think of college when Johnny or Jenny goes away that, half of your expenses, at least at a state school, are for room and board. And we talk about going to college and the cost of going to college. Well, half of that's just living and eating in a dorm situation, right? So, A, that's optional. You don't have to do that. But B, I think it gets to the point you're talking about, which is that a lot of what college does is it's sort of a finishing school, right? That we send off Johnny or Jenny to some campus when they're 18, and then they magically pop out when they're 22 and they're reasonably responsible adults. They figured out time management. They've probably done some stupid stuff and hopefully learn from their mistakes. There's a bunch of, at least Eddie, I don't know about Joe, but, what's that look like? And so this finishing school thing, I don't know if parents really think about that or not. I know we were purposeful in that, thinking that a couple of our kids, we didn't need all of our kids to go to school, but if they did, a couple of them were like, they could really benefit by going away to school. Not all of my kids, but a couple of them were like, I think that would be a really good experience for them. And maybe parents are thinking about that all the time. I'm not sure, but I think the finishing school aspect of it is a big deal. And then related to that, I think, I talk a lot in the book about elite schools and flagship schools, right? The flagships are the ones that get our attention. And, a lot of people don't know much about higher ed. And what they know about higher ed is what they read in the papers. And hey, I used playing football this weekend. And so, the things that are big and shiny and get our attention are these flagship universities. And we have this natural inclination to imagine that all colleges are like that. And I think that's another, problem, another misconception that people have, that the sort of thing you're going to get at a flagship school, the experiences you're going to have, the education you're going to get differs considerably than what you're going to get at, say, a regional comprehensive public institution like an IU Southeast, which is very different than what you're going to get at a Hanover. These are distinct educational products and services, right, that are really different in a way that I don't think parents have a very clear idea about.
Yeah, for sure. And then piggyback really quick, as families are trying to decide on what institution is best for them, right? We're talking about institutional fit. So often, with parents that I work with, they're using these publications that rank universities, right? And I've got a big problem with that, and I've said it on the show. When you look at some of the metrics that are used, to evaluate what college is best, and you look at it and it's the academic level of the incoming freshman class, right? I've always had a problem with that, because to me that's like judging a hospital on the health of the incoming patients, right? I want to know what's the output, what happens, how did they get better, right? So what would be your recommendation for parents and families when they're trying to help their student find a good institutional fit?
So recognize, I think the point you're making is that teaching is taking you where you're at and then moving it from there, right? And if I bring in a bunch of students here and just move them a little bit, and I versus another college that has students at this level and brings up a lot, the teaching's obviously a lot better at that second school. But if you compare results, the first school still looks better. One of the examples I use in the book, if you're a basketball fan, is the difference between John Calipari and Rick Pitino, the college basketball fans. And Calipari was bringing in really high level talent, right? It's not clear how much he improved them, but a lot of his players would go to the NBA because they were really good when they came to Kentucky. A guy like Pitino, also bringing in good talent, don't get me wrong, but he's known as a teacher, right? He's getting the most out of what people bring. And at the end of the day, Calipari may beat Pitino times out of 10 with the talent that he's got on the bench. But, who's the better teacher there? I take Pitino all day long. So what do you want from your college experience? What do parents want for their kids? And those rankings and the flagships and the things that get our attention, you're not going to get the best teaching experiences there. It's something different that you're going to acquire when you go to a flagship school.
Well, now because of that, every family I work with, I'm going to tell them pick a Patino college, not a Calipari college.
Very good.
Yeah.
So that's perfect, and that kind of leads me right into another question that I had for you on this. So you kind of talked a little bit about what you would describe, I think, as teaching institutions. So I think some of our listeners may not understand the difference between the research R1s, as we call them sometimes, and the different types of institutions. Can you give us a quick primer on the different types of institutions that there are, and kind of what one might expect when they're looking and researching? And I think you've kind of talked a little bit about the different types of students that might be more apt to succeed in certain environments. So maybe just a quick overview of that might be helpful for some of our listeners who are kind of maybe not aware of that quite as much.
It's the biggest value out of the book, added of the book. And I think it's one of those, this is the main question that parents don't even know to ask. It hasn't even occurred to them to think through this. So from administrator's perspective, a lot of times you'll hear talk about R1 and R2. So that stands for research one, research two. R1 are your, top of the cream of the crop, kind of high-end research, their flagship elites kind of schools. Then you've got R2 that are a notch below R1, but still heavily focused on research. If you talk to teachers, the language they use, professors, they talk about 4-4, 3-3, and 2-2. And what that refers to is your teaching load each semester. So 4-4 means I teach 4 courses in the fall, 4 courses in the spring. If I'm teaching 4 courses in the fall and spring, and the expectations that go with that sort of institution, which are very teaching centric, then it's expected that I'm going to be spending a lot of time with students, mentoring, et cetera, and I'm teaching 4 classes. Those kind of schools have little or no research expectations at all. A 3-3 school like IU Southeast, teaching is more important than research, but we're still doing research. We have a 3-3 load. I have some time for research now. We're still teaching focused. If you're really good at research and not good in the classroom, you will not keep your job. But teaching is important. Teaching beats research, but research is now on the table. Then you have your 2-2s, and the load can be even smaller at the real high-end schools, but let's call it a 2-2. Now research is the top priority. Teaching is secondary at best. If you're a good teacher but not a good researcher, you will not keep your job. And so research becomes preeminent. Now you have large lecture halls. Now I don't really care if you come to my office hours. You're actually a distraction, if not an annoyance to my research agenda. Completely different approaches to schooling. You go to 4-4 schools, usually liberal arts. They're going to give you a very good education. 3-3 is heavy on the teaching. 2-2 allows a number of things. Those are the flagships. If you want to do research, if you want to go to med school or something like that, that might be a better route. But if you want a superior teaching environment and experience, You're not going to get that at a 2-2. That's not how they're incentivized. That's not why they're there. They're there primarily to do research. Teaching is second, if it's even on the table.
So, just to help our listeners, most of our listeners are from the state of Indiana. Obviously, with this being a Indiana focused podcast, can you give us some examples of which type of institutions in Indiana fall, excuse me, fall into those categories? And please, I want to make sure that I point this out too. It doesn't mean, I mean, this isn't a comparison on what's best or what's better, what's worse. It's like you said, it's about fit, and it's about the right institution for your type of student or your type of learning. So, could you give us some examples of what types of institutions fit in each of those buckets?
First of all, we're painting with a very broad brush. So I'm not saying if you go to a 2-2 school, all the teaching is garbage. I'm not saying that at all, right? And I'm not saying if you go to a 3-3 that every teacher's going to be good. I'm not making that claim. There's a Venn diagram overlap here. We're talking in generalities. I don't really know the particular loads at all of these, right? But I do know that Indiana and Purdue certainly are on that end of the spectrum. They have a 2-2 load or even lower. A place like Ball State or places like that, maybe 2-2 or 2-3. I think they're also research focused. And then you have the regional comprehensives like us that are 3-3. Hanover would be a 4-4, et cetera. It also depends on what kind of teachers you get. So there are, that's another chapter in the book, but there's a difference between a tenured professor who's research oriented and a lecturer who is teaching oriented. You'll get very good teaching experiences from those lecturers, probably very large classes. You may not want that, but someone who loves to teach at least. So you got that going for you. But yeah, generally your bigger flagship elite schools, R1, R2, if you want to look at that language, are going to be your 2-2s. Schools like ours, 3-3, and then the Hanovers of the world, Taylor University, Grace College, places like that are going to be your 4-4s.
Okay, that's helpful. I think that helps those that are listening. And basically, the reason we ask about this is because we talk about college as an investment, right? And so these are all the determinants that go into what makes a good investment. So, being an economist, what's your best advice for families who are trying to calculate that return on investment, but maybe they need to be thinking beyond just salary after for that first job after college? What are some of those things they should be thinking about?
Salary, I think, is the first thing that gets our attention, but it's also quality of life. What kind of job do you want to have? And then we would also add the caveat from earlier. Maybe Johnny or Jenny isn't quite ready for college, or maybe, Jimmy or Sue should move into the trades instead, right? There's plenty of wonderful options there. A lot of it depends on the finances of the parents and the kids. Do they have money saved up? I can't really in good conscience encourage people to go into debt for an undergrad degree. It's not worth it. Uh, and then what kind of degree are you going to get? Is it a degree that's going to, take you where you want to go? Is it going to provide you with a job that pays reasonably well, et cetera? But, maybe debt for grad school, but I really can't in good conscience say that's a good idea for undergrad. If you can't afford college and room and board and all that stuff, I mean, why are you going to be $100,000 in debt or more at the end of 4 years? But that's like a house payment without the house. I mean, it's just the value of the education you're getting at those schools is not worth that kind of investment and the debt that goes with it.
No question. So one of the topics that we've discussed on this show is the facility arms race that's occurring right now on all college campuses, right? And it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, and I would love to hear your perspective on it, where universities are building new fancy dorms, and they got lazy rivers at LSU, and they got all these things to encourage students to attend their university, but at the same time, it's driving up costs and causing issues of affordability for families. But with that, do you think families are paying attention to mission, vision of universities, maybe looking at teaching quality, looking at community engagement with the college, or are they just looking at the shiny new research centers?
I think experience is a big draw for people. I think that's something that they legitimately, objectively value. I don't know if that's outweighing teaching. Again, all parents are different, so who knows? But those aren't shinier objects, right? And if people do have money or they want to borrow money, they're terrible personal finance, they want to borrow all kinds of money. That's part of that reason for the arms race at the living. And when people talk about college prices going up, what are you talking about? Are you talking about the college? Or are you talking about the lazy river at your university and the bougie dorm you got, right? Those are apples and rocks kind of comparisons that we're making. So I don't really know what I do know the parents I run into aren't thinking necessarily about all the things I think they should put on the table. Good people can disagree. If you want to, blow a lot of money on your kid living in a bougie dorm with a lazy river, hey, knock yourself out. But you should at least know the benefits and costs. You should, be hopefully decent at personal finance, and you should be thinking about what am I actually going to get for the money. We would never drop tens of thousands of dollars on a house or a car or whatever without having a pretty good sense of what we're getting. But higher ed, I don't think people know what they're getting many times. They don't know these basic distinctions between teaching and research and what their kids are going to get when they go off to college.
Yeah, and I think somewhere, we don't want to prolong this episode too long, but I think at some point, institutions, we do need to look at what the rising costs and how we're also supporting our students, right? It's concerning at times when we have athletic coach buyouts for $54 million, yet we have to have a food pantry on our campuses because students can't afford groceries, right? That's an issue that we need to resolve in higher ed.
Yeah, there's real challenges there. We have catering to all kinds of students, at least at a campus like ours. I don't know how much of that kind of thing occurs at your flagship schools, but we certainly wrestle with that. But on the other hand, we're not dropping a lot of money on, college coaches either. So I'm not really sure exactly. I hear you. I'm not sure what to do with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, well said. It's definitely a tough issue. You were talking about regional public institutions. So it's ones like we work at as part of the IU system. I'm kind of curious as to how you think about how students achieve the same outcomes, or maybe even could be better outcomes, could be worse, right? We're painting a broad stroke here, but how do you take those experiences at those types of institutions and compare them to the outcomes of maybe students who went to more expensive institutions? How can parents think about that, and how can students think about that when they're trying to choose and they're thinking inherently that one is better than the other?
I go back to the, how different school that tracks higher ed people does something with them. This is a school like an IU Southeast where we'll take all comers pretty much, and then we'll see what happens at the end of the process. It is interesting to me that when we get to compete our high end students against others, like our CFA challenge, we've won that, I don't know, a bunch of years, 3 or 4 in a row now. And we're beating schools like U of L and UK. We joke that IU doesn't come down here to compete with us anymore. We got tired of getting beat. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but they don't come anymore. And what is that? Our students beating U of L and UK. And I know the admission standards there are higher, but it makes sense, at least intuitively, that those are also schools that are research oriented. The teaching's not as good on average. And so why wouldn't our students beat theirs? We do really well on standardized tests. We're top 10% in the nation with our business school. And at one level, it's shocking, but another level, once you understand how colleges work, it's not all that surprising at all.
It's good
Yeah, that
stuff.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
That's helpful. Eddie, go ahead.
yeah, for sure. So uh, you also talk about in the book that students need to take ownership of their education, right? And uh, what does that look like in practice? As I'm working with students, and I'm always encouraging them to take ownership. By the way, um, Eric, if you haven't read Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willenick, I highly recommend it. It's a great book, especially when you're working with young people. But what does that look like in practice to you?
Heard him speak, have not read the book. But yeah, property rights. I'm an economist, I think through certain lenses. And so I think about property rights, right? There are exceptions that if I borrow your lawnmower, I'm probably going to treat it better than my own because we live next door and I want to, want you to be, I want to be a good neighbor, right? But most of the time, when I don't own something, I don't treat it as well, right? And so that's what we're talking about here. It's a basic principle in economics. It's the idea of property rights. Without property rights, people just are not as likely to treat things as well. And so applying that to education, if you don't own it, you know, what are you going to do with it, right? If you're thinking, well, I'm doing this for my mom, or I don't know why I'm here, or I just got to get through this. That's not really ownership, let alone extreme ownership, right? This is your life. What are you doing here, right? And so again, if you're not ready for college, we'll see in a couple of years, hopefully. But you're not really ready for that, right? But ownership means I'm here to get a credential. I'm here to learn a bunch of stuff. And so let's do it. Let's not, joke around with these classes. Let's not use AI to get the homework and then maybe get a C if I'm lucky. I mean, that's just not the approach to college that's going to make this investment worth all the time and money you're putting into it. It's not just the money, it's the time. 4 years of your life and all the foregone wages of that are also tens and tens of thousands of dollars that you're giving up by going to college. Don't fritter it away, you know, goofing off in the classroom. If that's your approach, you're not taking ownership, come see us later.
Yeah,
Well,
to speak to that, I used to when at the freshman seminar courses I used to teach, one of the first 1 or 2 classes, I would ask my students, like, "Why are you here? Like, why are you here?" And I remember one student being like, "That's deep." I'm like, "No, I'm not trying to be deep. Like, really, like, what is it that you want to achieve out of this thing?" To really get them to think that, because I do fear that sometimes you talked about the Midwest reflex. I do fear sometimes students will make the decision to go to college because they think that's what they're supposed to do after high school, instead of really thinking and being intentional with what I want out of this experience.
I've done a number of these orientations at our school, and they've tried various models, and sometimes they've had panel discussions of faculty. And that was one of the things I would say, right? I would address the parents directly and say, look, if you're pressuring your kid to be here and they're not, and you're not being candid about their ability, I'd encourage you to revisit that conversation before you sign that check. I didn't always get invited back to the orientations. I'm not sure the university was happy with that, but what are we doing here, right? We're just wasting time and money and a lot of frustration. And so it's not the kind of thing you pressure someone into. High school, yeah, you can make them go to high school, but college, you can't. You can't make them go to class. You can't make them. How do you handle your freedom in a college classroom? A lot of kids aren't ready for that. And a parent needs to have the wisdom and the wherewithal, the courage sometimes to say, look, go get a grunt job, do that for a year. Let's revisit the conversation next year.
Dr. Schansberg, that's what we love about you. You're never, how do I say it? You're definitely not a wallflower. I think you're pretty good at being able to tell us your opinions, and I admire that about you. I think that's a good thing. I think we need more of that. And so, speaking of that, I'm going to really set you up for this one. So, you've talked a little bit about cost and financing and about writing that check. So, what are some of the biggest financial pitfalls that families fall into when they're planning for college? Right, when they're sitting there thinking about that, like they're doing math in their head. They're maybe not, they're trying to compare prices, but they don't know what sticker price is versus what the scholarships are going to be. Give us some of those pitfalls that they need to watch out for.
I talk a little bit about scholarships in the book, but that's not an area of expertise. Obviously, if that's important to you, then, pull up every rock and look around. I think obviously your academic preparation makes a difference there. I just think people aren't good at personal finance a lot of times. And so they're just going into debt over stuff they shouldn't be doing. And they're not really thinking about rates of return. Their kid's going to, major in something that isn't really going to be uh, all that profitable for them. Or they're not thinking about, the differences in the types of schools. And if you go to that flagship school and get okay teaching, is it really worth dropping a ton of money for that? I think I'd rather be in a setting where I'm getting good teaching and small class sizes, and then your rate of return is going to be better. But I think if people are aware of the distinctions we're talking about, they can make more informed decisions. And then, of course, that bleeds over into finances.
Now, we've talked a lot about parents and families and their role in the college decision making for a student. Once a student is accepted to a university and they decide that they are going to be, on campus, what role do you think parents play once their student is in college? How can they best support students?
I don't know about you guys, but I got four young men in my house or my family, 22 to 27 years old. And you hear a lot of parents of older kids talk about, man, I thought it was going to get easier. And it is easier, I think, overall, although, your kid's going to be knuckleheads enough where, it could be extremely difficult. So, um, but I think the transition and the literature I've been reading, the books we've been reading, my wife and I, is that you have to move from parent to coaching. You're not really parenting anymore. I'm not sure you're really parenting at age 17 either. It's probably a spectrum where you become increasingly a coach and decreasingly a parent and the styles that go with that. So I think you need to have, good conversations with your kids, ask a lot of questions, really get them to wrestle with what are we trying to do here, not push your agenda on them because at the end of the day, they're probably not going to do that anyway. You got to get in line with what they want. And so it's more of a coaching thing than a parenting thing, I think. And then I think you need to find ways to get the kid back to property rights to be invested in it. So a couple things we did, we set aside a certain amount of money in our savings and basically said to each kid, look, here's this block of money that we have, and it can be for college. It can be for a down payment on a house. It can be for you to start a business. We don't care. We just want you to be productive and happy and all those things. And if you don't want to go to college, but you want to do start a business instead, if you want to find another way to make a good living and you want to use the excess money for a down payment on a house, that's totally cool with us. So they're spending their money. And so now, at least in theory, right, they're thinking through, okay, what do I want to do? Do I want to blow another, 10,000, 20,000 on this school, or would I rather have that money for mom and dad to put into a house? Would I rather spend the money, being a goofball here at college, or would I rather start a business? I've got a couple kids that are pretty entrepreneurial. So we really just said, look, this is going to be your money, and just let's be wise on how you spend it. The second thing we did was in any given semester, if you're going to pay the tuition, then how can they have skin in the game? They're not going to pay for their lodging, probably. They're not going to pay for their tuition. That's a lot. If you're in a position to help them to pay for those things, but they can pay for books. And so we did that. We had our kids pay for half of the books. We wanted to get them in the mode of thinking about the cost and the rent and the buy and all the decisions that go with textbooks. And we knew if we just said, hey, we'll buy whatever you want, well, they're going to put whatever they want on the checkout belt. We didn't really want that. We wanted them to be thinking about, hey, is this a good expenditure? Now, books are a chunk of money, but they're not that much. If we got our kid thinking about, hey, is this really worth doing right now? That's effective. One last thing we did is, and we've been sometimes a little softer on this than this rule, but we basically said you get one mulligan on our D or an F. And after that, you're paying for the classes. So we haven't firmly held to that, but that has been the rule, more or less. And so I think just to have those kind of conversations, look, you get a D or an F, that happens. You get two of them, we're not going for that. We're not going to pay for you to be a goofball here and do a bunch of stuff. So I think just to get creative about how we do money and get the kid involved and give them a piece of a stake in the decisions is, it's not a foolproof plan or anything, but it's better than just writing a blank check. It kills me how parents will write a blank check. They have no connection. FERPA locks them out. They've not made any connections with their kids, saying, look, I'm not writing the check unless I have access to these records. Kills me that parents do that. Again, what other facet of life would you write that kind of check for? Anything goes? Are you kidding me? Who does that? So I just don't think I don't know if it's because they're kids or they're our kids or we're just not knowledgeable enough. We're not thinking ahead enough, but it's not a lot of wisdom on some of this stuff.
I think it's very insightful. Very helpful. So if you could redesign, I'm just kind of curious as we've been thinking through this. So if you could redesign maybe one aspect of the college experience to make it more relevant to today's workforce needs, because we've talked a little bit about, that reality of when you get to the end of the degree, obviously there needs to be a plan on what to do with that. So how would you, and again, I'm going on a tangent here, but anyone that pays attention to the state of Indiana right now, you will hear the constant push for workforce, and very interesting how that conversation comes out in different areas from government leaders. So, if you could redesign one aspect of the college experience to make it more relevant to the workforce needs of today, what would you do?
If I were king for a day, I think on this stuff, or a year, I guess it would take probably. I would think to inject some more business into education. I don't know if, we don't have any business courses in the core curriculum, but we're all in business. We're all in sales. We're all these things. I mean, I don't know if you've ever done this, but try the next time you go to a doctor or dentist, talk to them about how much business education they got. when they went to med school? And the answer is usually zero. Occasionally there's a course or there's some extracurricular opportunities out there, but you want to get a doctor excited and bent is when they realize they're operating their own business and they got no training how to operate a business. And now they're out with all this debt and now they're making mistakes that are costing them tens of thousands of dollars because they don't have any business knowledge. All of us are in business. All of us are selling ourselves, right? And basic understanding literacy of these things, I think would be really helpful. So I think that would be important. I know at our school, there's been more talk about that. I don't know if it'll make it into the core curriculum, but just a recognition that, you can be a major in blank. I don't want to name majors here, but you're going to be working for a business, right? And so why not be literate about those things? I think a second thing is, aside from the skills, you have to sell yourself, right? So now we're into things like internship, networking, interview skills, things like that are so important. And we see it, at our university. I think our kids struggle more with that. I think they're as sharp often as the kids that go off to John Calipari U, but a lot of times they're not selling it as well there. And so I think the networking, interviewing, all that stuff is very helpful to you. So I think I would definitely, emphasize that for students and within the curriculum and outside the curriculum.
It's funny you say that because when we talk to business owners, we hear that quite often, right? It's that and again, I don't like we've coined that term soft skills a long time ago. Now we call them essential skills, right? I mean, they really are. They're essential skills to any job, and we hear that quite often, and how important that is. And so yeah, that makes a lot of good sense. One of the things, and this isn't going to shock you, and this might be a good debate because I'm talking to an economist here, so you have some certain theories that I think might disagree with me, but when I see 51% of our youth that are graduating college and are not going, only 51% are going on to any kind of education after high school, that concerns me for a whole lot of reasons. And I would say we need to raise that number. There's probably a limit. Not everyone needs to go to college. We've already talked about that, but what are your thoughts on that? And what can we be doing to get that number up? Because that's like the $1 million question. Like everyone's looking around like, hey, we need a more educated citizenry. We need more students graduating from college, but no one seems to be able to figure out how we get that number up from 51% that's steadily declining year after year.
A lot of reasons for it. We haven't had a good recession in a while, except for COVID and the weirdness that created. Recessions drive people back to higher ed. So that's one answer, but we don't control that. I think the most interesting thing here, and I think we've seen a lot of progress on it, is high school to college transition, right? That high school can be a whole lot better of preparing their people for the future, whether that's college or not, and then establishing pathways to college. When you look at the data on retention, at least at schools like ours, high school GPA is a very strong predictor of success. So that's not a shocker. But another one are those tier one courses we talked about. If you've taken a bunch of dual credit and honors and AP courses and stuff, yeah, you got a much better shot. You've got a higher level of aptitude. B, you've been for 4 years, you've actually had to study. I mean, if you're in those second tier classes in most high schools, a lot of times you don't even have to study. So what are the odds that someone who hasn't studied for 4 years in high school is going to be successful at college? So how on earth would we prepare someone who's gone on a track like that to be ready for the rigors of college? They don't have the time management, the discipline, the study skills, etc. So high schools need to, maybe do a better job there, develop those pathways, develop the skills as best they can. And then colleges on the other side of that need to be more effective at figuring out what it looks like to enter with those things. I know for an idea I just had this last week was that, when we have orientation and first year seminars, maybe our orientations or our first year seminars should be different for students that don't have a lot of dual credit. I mean, those are fundamentally different kinds of students. And so for me to just deliver one sort of orientation, one sort of FYS class to these disparate populations cannot be the ideal approach. So, it's a little awkward to say, hey, Johnny, you didn't take a lot of honors AP stuff. We're going to give you a little extra attention. But they really need that. The odds of them being successful without something that eases their pathway to college is just not what you want it to be.
Yeah, it makes a lot of
Um,
sense.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Eddie.
speaking of curriculum, there's a lot of literature out there right now about higher ed, and one of the concerns that some of my students express is they feel like if they don't have a lot of dual credit, they're going to waste time with the core curriculum requirements, right? Their English and their history and their social behavior sciences and their bio and whatnot. Um, can you give your insights on the value of the liberal arts education and what those courses provide students, even if they're not going to specialize in that area, what that provides for them intellectually and academically?
that's interesting to hear that perspective. I thought about that, but yeah, if my friend has 30 credits and I have none, it looks like I'm wasting a year, right, prospectively. And that's interesting. I hadn't considered that. I talk to my students about Gen Ed. I make 3 points. The first is, you're going to get exposed to classes that you didn't even know existed. How would you know you're going to be an econ major or a supply chain major or anthropology or whatever? You don't even know what these do. You probably had your gym coach for econ. You don't really, you took a stock market thing that was called econ, but it really wasn't. You haven't had real econ. You haven't had supply chain. You haven't even heard of these things. How would you know unless you give it a shot?
No, no, I definitely I stress the value of being exposed, and you use econ. I always use anthropology as my example. I tell my high school students, I'm like, how many anthropology classes have you had? And they always say no because we don't offer any. And I'm like, well, then how do you know you're not an anthropology major? Like you've never been exposed to it. And I say it so much that actually one of my former students brought me her anthropology book from undergrad. And she's like, you talked about this so much here. Now you have a book to show the students. But I also stress that becoming a better critical thinker is going to occur when you're exposed to different curriculums. And you're there's value if you're going to be pre-med and become a better writer, right? Like there's great value in these courses, even if you don't see it at the surface level.
So I think the first thing is that there's fields that you don't even know about. And so anthropology or supply chain, whatever that looks like, right? You don't even know those are things. How would you know if you don't try them? So part of general education is giving you a broad approach. Another consideration is think about an accounting major who only takes accounting courses. That's a very different major, right? And so some of the people are so skills based. I don't think that's really what they want. You don't want an accounting major who's only had accounting courses. You want them to have a bunch of other business courses. And frankly, you probably want them to have broader courses than that. There's something about the broadening effects of education. And then another consideration is that sometimes in life, we have to learn and operate in fields we don't like or that we're not especially comfortable in. And you have to learn how to learn. And so to me, maybe the top answer here is that general education stretches your ability to learn in other ways that you're not going to get if everything you take is in the field that you love. Sometimes we have to press through. Sometimes we have to persevere when it's difficult. That's life. And we're not a persevering people, generally speaking. But you want a happy life, you got to learn to persevere. And sometimes that means you got to get through a course that you don't want. But this broader thing about critical and creative thinking, how do you get creative with your thinking? You have to be exposed to other areas where you learn how to think differently than you do now. That's general education.
I got my new quote of the podcast. If you want a happy life, you better learn to persevere. It's a pretty good one. It's a pretty good one. Dr. Eric Schansberg joining us, talking about his book, College 101. And I've got a question for you. So if there's the book right there. Look, a beautiful book. And I know it's an ebook, but it's also through Amazon. You can get a paperback version of it. And I want you to talk about where to find that. But as a preview to that question, if every high school senior in Indiana could read just one chapter of that book, which would you choose and why?
Yeah, so it's a little ebook. It's $3 on Amazon. You can get it in paperback for $6. So pretty cool on Amazon. You just punch a few extra buttons, they turn it into a paperback for you. So that's pretty cool. But I think that the chapter, if I had to pick one, would be the second chapter. We've already covered that topic about the 4-4-3-3 and 2-2 schools because that just drives so much. And I'm surprised how little people know about that. They're not really thinking about that at all. But if you go to a 2-2, you're going to have a lot of grad students teaching it. Sometimes they're great. You're going to have large lecture halls. You're going to have people who are not incentivized to teach a lot. They're just trying to get through the teaching so they can, get back to their research. A lot of multiple choice exams. When I teach high school over at Providence, I get to teach the first college econ course over there. And IU makes me give them some multiple choice questions for standardized testing. And I tell them, look, here's how I give tests. Here's how IU does tests. Is that what you want to? That's what you're going to get when you go to a school like that and there's 300 people in a room. Guess what? There's not going to be a lot of open-ended questions. There's going to be a lot of multiple choice. They're going to feed it in a Scantron, and then they're going to go back to their research. And so if that's what you want, hey, that's cool. But that's what you're going to get a lot of when you go to a school like that. And I just don't think people understand that. And that works for a lot of people. Other people, that does not work at all. That large class size is going to be a problem. A large campus is going to be a problem. We haven't really talked about that also, right? Sometimes students are just overwhelmed by the size of things and the impersonal bureaucracy. So what do you want? What do you need? What does your kid need? And I know it's your dream to go to the flagship school and that your kid would go, okay, fine. But if that's not in their best interest, if it's going to be this huge struggle, if they would really do better in a smaller campus with smaller class sizes, if they really need the personal attention of a teaching college, then don't send them to a place that doesn't value teaching.
So if you're a first generation college student, how would your advice differ there? And I think I know the answer, but I'm just curious because I think that we talk a lot about first generation college students in the state of Indiana. Obviously, when you have 51% going on, there's gonna still be a huge portion of the population that are going to have their first family member going to college. So how would you advise them any different, or maybe not?
Yeah, I don't think very different. I think a little at the margin, I think I'd be more likely to send them to a smaller school, but I think there's probably a lot of first generation kids who would do just fine. So I don't think that's a key determinant. I think it might flavor it a bit.
I think it's very helpful. One of the things I too, as we kind of start to wrap up this episode, and I think about this, there's been so much. If you read or watch the news, there's been a lot about the Indiana legislature, really taking a look at higher ed and kind of what their kind of oversight is of higher education. So, if you had an hour as an economist and somebody who cares about college in the state of Indiana, with some of our legislators, what would you say to them about kind of what they've been doing here lately and kind of that type of work? I'm not trying to put you on the spot in any way, but I just think there's a lot of conversation happening around the state, and a lot of it's changing some of the governance structure of higher ed. And I'm just kind of curious what your take and your experience would be on some of those changes and what might help them as they continue to think more about what kind of changes they're going to recommend in the future.
First question, I guess I wish I had survey data on this, but if I was talking to any given legislator, I think I would start where I did here. Do you understand the difference between IU and IUS? And maybe they do. I mean, I hope they do, but they're doing a lot of things and they're coming from all kinds of backgrounds, and I would not bet my ranch that the average legislator is familiar with that, but they may very well make the same mistakes and imagine that we're all like IU with respect to social issues and freedom of speech and class sizes and research and teaching and niche majors. I don't really know what they know, but and it'd be a shame if they're legislating without that basic information. So I think I would still start with that. Hey, we're different. Hanover is not the same as IUS. It's not the same as IU. They all have their place. They're all doing their thing, but they are not the same. And so a legislator hopefully knows that. Parents and students should know that.
So it sounds like the book is really for any legislator or anybody that wants to go to college. Or no,
Or,
very fair. I think it's fair comment.
or any Hall of Fame basketball coaches. They should probably read this as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Tino would be happy to see his name in the book.
That's right. That's right. So, one of the things that parents and students look into when they're trying to make their collegiate choice is, of course, the academics and, of course, the co-curricular opportunities. But they also look into traditions at a university. And Dr. Schansberg, you got your PhD from a university that is steep in tradition. So, and one of those includes the Midnight Yell. So, I'm just curious, how many Midnight Yells did you participate in, and do you still know some of the chants?
I do. Hullabaloo, connect, connect, hullabaloo, connect, connect.
Let's
One of
go.
the Aggie cheers there. So the funny thing is I did my undergrad at a place that's very good, but underrated, under the radar. It's a fairly new university called George Mason University. Been around for 60, 70 years, had a couple Nobel Prize winners in economics. done some very interesting things. They've been super strategic and have really come out of nowhere as a university. No football team though, right? So we're not known through sports, which is interesting. Our basketball team did make the Final Four about 20 years ago. That was a pretty big deal. That helps, right? But we're not very well known, and I think it goes to the point we're making. Even though it's a research school, it doesn't have a sports program, at least in terms of football, and so it's not as well known. Then I go to A&M for grad school. I go from no football to capital F football, and really enjoyed my time down there. Greatest 6 years of my life, set me up for everything that came afterwards. An amazing school. And as an undergrad experience, I went as a grad student, so I didn't really directly experience a lot of that stuff, but it is steeped in tradition. The football was amazing. The midnight yell practice, the tradition there was they were an all male school, didn't have cheerleaders. I think until recently they had yell leaders. And so they would get together at midnight before the home games and practice the yells. And so they have these yell leaders all dressed in white and doing hand gestures, and they're telling the crowd what to chant at particular times. All the students are standing on one side. All the older people across the way are sitting down. For a long time, they had the 12th man, where they actually had a walk-on as part of the kickoff team. For a while, I think the entire kickoff team was walk-ons, and then they reduced it to one player. And I'm not sure what they're doing with that now. But yeah, amazing tradition from a military perspective, agriculture, veterinarian school. But yeah, it's just remarkably steeped in tradition there with the bonfire and everything else.
So,
Well, go ahead, finish up. I got to follow up to that.
No, I was going to say, so I guess now is a good time to break the news to all of our listeners that IU Southeast will now have the Southeast Scream sessions, and that'll be held out right outside the Ogle Center before every basketball game, right?
I should have totally cut you off and let you go there, but but no, I think what I'm kind of most interested in is even when you were doing your PhD back there, never in a million years would you have thought that Indiana University and Texas A&M football would be 2-3 in the in the national ratings. There's no way you could tell me you ever predicted that.
No way.
So your worlds collide. See, you just never know. You never know what's going to happen. I guess that's another thing in higher ed, right? You just never know, right?
I think back to experience. I mean, there is some value there. So I'm not saying, don't go to a school like that. But again, what are you getting out of it? I mean, if I had a kid that was into certain things and we had a lot of money or whatever, I mean, A&M is a really cool place to go. You're going to get a lot of neat, memorable stuff, and you're going to have friends for a lifetime and all those things. So, I don't want to, dump on the flagships as if that's some kind of problem. There's a lot of great stuff that happens there. It's more just knowing what you can afford, what's best for your kid, what's best for you as a student, right? What are you trying to do here? And just make sure you have all the benefits and costs on the table, and then you can make a good decision.
I love it. I think it's a great place to end, because I think that's really what it comes down to, is matching up each of those characteristics to try to find your place to be able to, be able to help enrich your life and be able to set you up for success. So, Eddie, any final thoughts from you before we wrap up this episode?
No, again, thank you so much for joining the show. I guess my last question is, if you could summarize the message of College 101 in one sentence for those who haven't had a chance to read it yet, what would it be?
A semicolon, so I can say a few things. I would say question your priors, be aware of things you think you know. Visit campuses, make that visiting different types of campuses, if not the campuses you go to actually see it. Then what do you want? What are you trying to do here? Don't stumble into a research school when you really want good teaching experiences. Just know what you want and be aware, ask the right questions to get the information you're going to need to make the right decisions.
Perfect way to end it. Thank you, Dr. Schansberg, for joining us today. We're going to take a quick break, and then Eddie and I are going to be back to wrap up this episode. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Next Step In podcast. Well, another great episode, Eddie. Thanks so much for helping me. And like I said, it was a lot of fun to hear from Dr. Schansberg. Glad that he wrote the book, literally wrote the book on College 101. And I hope that a lot of people will go out and check it out because I think there's a lot of good nuggets and a lot of good resources in there that can help students and families. And it's a short read, which is nice too.
Yeah, no question. And I really like that he wrote it so that it's good for multiple audiences, right? Parents, students, and as a post-secondary counselor, parents, if you're listening to this, get the book, have your student read the book, read it as a family, and then set aside some time to discuss these things because that extreme ownership piece is so important. And working with high school students and then also working at a university, seeing those students who take the ownership early, those are the ones that are successful.
Well said. I mean, I think the thing that I think also really kind of resonated with me throughout the interview is just how much this is really almost in a way to compare it to dating. It's really like finding your fit, right? Finding your person, finding your institution. Like there's a lot that goes into that, and you have to ask those tough questions. And sometimes the shiny object is what kind of rules the day. And you might, have a student that's like, "Hey, this is the best 4 years of my life." Maybe you're a parent that's like, "You know what? I wish I could go back to college. Those were the best 4 years of my life." But you really got to think about everything, the full package, the full totality of what that looks like from a debt perspective, from a education perspective, what they're going to major in, what they're going to do after college. There's just so many other factors that go into that. And I think that was the one thing about the conversation about the book I really liked is that there is a place for everyone. It's just you got to find that place, right? And there's so many factors. And Eddie, you probably, I mean, not to put you really on the spot, but being a post secondary counselor, you stay in touch. I know with a lot of your students who leave to go to college, and then that first year happens or maybe that first semester happens and then they make the change and they transfer because they've realized they're not in the play. Is that true? I mean, has that happened a lot in your career?
Listen, every December, November, December, my email goes crazy from the previous graduating class. Hey, Mr. Bobbitt, we need to discuss some things. And it is very much like dating, right? If I walk into an establishment and say, who wants to date me? I may get a couple of yeses, right? But they're probably not in it for the long call, and the alignment's not there, right? There are a lot of universities that may accept you, but you need to look into it a little bit further. You need to look at is the mission aligned? Are the goals the same? Because if not, it's not going to be a long term fit, and you're not going to be happy. So absolutely, I hear from students all the time who made a decision because their friend went to this college, or their parents wanted them to go to this college, and there are pressure from parents sometimes on students to go to specific college because, and some parents don't want to hear this, but the parents want to look like their child is going to this prestigious university or going to this flagship school, so that they can have their moment on Facebook to say, hey, my child's going to this instead of really looking into what's the best fit for the student. And sometimes it's not the school that just because you went to it and you want your student to go to because there'll be a legacy, that's still not the best fit for the student, and we got to be more intentional about that.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And I guess the one thing I would give out there, anyone that feels like they're in the wrong place right now, it's never too late and you can find your right fit. I think that's the other thing is that there are a lot of different institutions. We all get a little bit wiser the older we get and through our shared experiences and through our experiences in life. So there's always times to pivot. There's always a time for you to find your right institution, even if it's been a few years. I mean, I don't know how many people we have listening to this that maybe have a little bit of college under their belt. Maybe they got into the workforce, maybe they left and they may be looking to go back, or they know someone that may be looking to go back. It's never too late. I would encourage you to reach out to your local institution and have that conversation. There are probably more and more, well, no, I know this, there are more and more programs to be able to help students be able to complete degrees that they started or to be able to give some credit for some of that life experience. I've not told this on the podcast. Maybe this will be another episode, but my father finished his degree at 82 years of age. And it was amazing. And he had more credits than he thought he had back from when he took them in the 1970s. And life happened, right? And so life happens sometimes. So it's never too late. I would encourage you if it's something that you've been wanting to do, definitely give a call to your local institution and see what's out there. There's a lot of opportunity.
Or you could also call the co-host of Next Step In, and we will guide you and get you where you need to go.
And we will only charge you. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. No, hey, we're trying to get that. Hey, we're trying to get that 51% up, right? It doesn't matter. Whatever it takes, we're getting that 51% up.
That's right.
All right. Well, hey, that's a wrap on episode 6 of the Next Step In podcast. Thank you so much for joining us for this important conversation for the value of education here in Indiana. We hope that this episode will help give you something to think about, inspire you to hopefully share it with others. If you like today's show, be sure to follow, subscribe, share it with someone who will benefit from hearing these discussions. There's nothing you can do better for us than sharing this. If you think it's somewhat helpful, and if this podcast helps one individual, we will consider ourselves very blessed and happy to do it for the time. So thank you for listening. Until next time, this has been Next Step In, where education meets opportunity. Have a great week, Hoosiers.